Are we all in?
We are all in, Bentley. The floor is yours.
Hello everyone. This is the first meeting of 2024 of the BNF committee. So stoked for that. Hope this is a good year. We'll see. Um, I am the chair this year, in accordance with the rules, bylaws that we've set. So, I'm gonna kind of keep this brief because we have guests presenting today, Susan Lyons, I do believe. We do have a guest presenting today, so I kind of want to give her the chance to present, do her thing, and then we'll kind of transfer over to the business of the committee. So, your floor.
I have a slide deck. Would you like me to go ahead and share that for you as I'm letting folks in? We've got a few more people sliding in.
Sure, Lillian, that'd be great. Thank you. I think it's just one slide, but it'll help sort of make sense of my long-winded update.
Okay. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, now let me just... Okay. And just real quick, quick agenda for everybody today. So we just had our welcome from Bentley White, our new chair. And now we're going to be transitioning over to Susan Lyons, who's with the Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee. And given all of the excitement around the work they're doing, we wanted to invite them to update our members. So Susan, I will go ahead and pass to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bentley, and thank you, Lillian, for the invitation to join you all today. I'm thrilled to be here. I think as we move through the next stages of our work together, it will just become increasingly important to create these kinds of cross-committee connections and make sure we're all aware of what's happening in each of the committees and how we can be supporting each other's work and building off the good thinking that the other committees are doing. So I'm thrilled to sort of bring you an update and hopefully get some reactions and ideas and thoughts from you all from your perspective here in the BNF committee in relation to the work that you all have been doing and your plan for the next 6 months and beyond. So thank you. And Bentley, congratulations on becoming the new chair. It's really fantastic to see you taking on that leadership role. So I'll start with just providing a little bit of a context for our work up until this point, and then tell you where we're at in the progress that we've made since the November convening. So our task, or our committee, is charged with sort of thinking through implications of assessment and accountability in relation to our full COOL council. So we've really been focused from the beginning on really assessment and accountability, understanding the current policy, or sorry, the current conditions here in Kentucky, and understanding our aspirations for the future. So we started our work by just learning. We engaged in 6 months of learning what is happening that's innovative here in the state of Kentucky, not just right now, but in the past. Kentucky has a really long and rich history of innovation when it comes to assessment and accountability. So we had committees within our committee studying the history of innovation related to assessment and accountability in Kentucky. And then, of course, seeking to understand what's happening right now. So many districts, not just our L3s, but certainly in our L3s and beyond, there are great local innovations happening around assessment and accountability that our committee sought to sort of, at least at a cursory level, get a survey of and understand. But we didn't stop there. We had other subcommittees in our committee looking at what can we learn nationally, what states are or have been innovating around assessment and accountability, and also internationally understanding what are different kinds of models that exist out there. How do other nations think about and enact assessment and accountability? So we looked at Finland and Singapore, all over, to just sort of get a good landscape and lay of the land. After that 6 months of exploring and learning and synthesizing, we as a committee then came up with 12 design principles for what our committee members wanted to see in the future of assessment and accountability here in Kentucky. And I am going to link in that document. Hopefully it is the right document. It is in the chat. Jennifer or Andre, who are also here from the Accelerating Innovation Committee, can correct me if that's the wrong document that I linked in. But those design principles were sort of, we wanted to start there as sort of grounding our work. Any future design of a system of assessment and accountability that we might propose for the state should hold up to these 12 design principles. We want it to have an evaluative framework around which to consider and critique any potential proposals or designs that we might come up with for our state. And so after we did the design principles, we then engaged in some prototyping. And this is where we started thinking about this system of systems idea. You might have heard this phrase thrown around. I know it's been thrown around in our Cool Council meetings. And what we're talking about when we say a system of systems, it's kind of a jargony way of thinking about, okay, there's lots of local variability happening in the state. There's lots of local education systems, local assessment and accountability systems. What is the role of the state education system in setting the parameters that both sort of creates guardrails for quality and equity in terms of what do we want to see that's consistent across those local systems, and also creating the conditions to really empower local vibrant learning experiences. So the state system sort of has a tall task of figuring out, okay, what are those parameters, guidelines, incentives that we want to create that will incentivize the most equitable and vibrant local system. Jennifer Stafford always really gives this excellent example that we already have a system of systems here in the state of Kentucky. If you think about just sort of graduation rules as an example, right? So the state has sort of minimum requirements related to course composition that students have to take, the minimum number of credits, the minimum expectations that any student in the state of Kentucky must satisfy in order to graduate high school. But of course, then local districts, local jurisdictions have their own rules. They have their own processes in place about what constitutes a graduate in their locality. And so we already have a really well-functioning system of systems here in the state of Kentucky, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. State, Commonwealth's our member state. And so we're just sort of trying to use that model as a way to think more creatively about what's possible related to assessment and accountability more broadly. And so after we created our design principles, we went into some prototyping around what could a system of systems look like. We tackled it from a local perspective, a state-supported perspective, and a more sort of state-centralized perspective to get an idea of the lay of the land, the possible ways we could approach this. And out of that work, we landed on this framework for essential features. We needed to understand as a committee, what are the essential features that we want our system of systems to ultimately be grounded in, to anchor our work. And that was the really exciting work that happened at our November Cool Council convening. Our committee, along with input from the other committees, importantly on that second day when we had the working groups, really landed and centered on this idea of a menu of options. There's precedent for using a menu of options type indicator in the Kentucky State Accountability System. And our members saw it as a good way of sort of holding the line on here are the things that we kind of value from a state perspective, while also allowing for local flexibility and even at the student level, potentially student agency and sort of determining their own pathway through a menu of options. And so that brings us pretty much currently to where we are in terms of thinking about, okay, if we're going to move forward with system of systems design focused on this menu of options idea, what are all the possible ways that we might collect evidence of more vibrant learning happening on the ground in local districts that could serve as those options in our menu. So we spent a little bit of time really digging in, learning about the post-secondary readiness menu option indicator to sort of get our juices flowing and understanding what's happening already in terms of student flexibility and local flexibility within that indicator at the state level. And then we just started brainstorming. What are ways that we might collect or gather evidence that vibrant, deeper learning experiences are happening for students in school? And our group, along with many of you here, as well as representatives from the Vibrant Learning Committee, really generated a lot of ideas. I don't know if I can share my screen, Lillian, but I would love to show our members here today just a screenshot of all of the options that we come up with. So let me see if I can do that. Okay, so this is kind of small, and maybe Andre or Jennifer can post the link in the chat, or I can certainly do it when I'm not sharing my screen. But we generated a lot of ideas, right? So we looked at some examples. Karen Perry and Sarah Snipes were nice enough to join our committee meeting and share some examples of vibrant learning happening. And that sort of helped us think through, okay, what would be the indicators? What could be the data that we might generate that might serve as an indicator in our state accountability system, or at least options within an indicator that would indicate more vibrant learning is happening. And so you can see we've got defenses of learning, we've got capstone projects, student-led conferences, we have in terms of outcomes, and then Andre sort of categorized these for us. We've got sort of outcome-based ideas, and we have more experience-based ideas, right? The students are feeling a sense of agency, the students have choice, students have access to internships or career-connected experiences. So you can see this is really still very much in a generative brainstorming phase. We have not yet had the chance to reflect on these options or apply sort of any sort of narrowing or focusing in lens to these ideas just yet, but we ended our meeting on Monday still in sort of the idea generation phase. And so that's obviously next on our plan, is to go back and refine our options and apply an evaluative framework to these options. But what we'd love from you all is, of course, welcome, happy to answer any questions, any confusions. I know I put a lot of information at you, but what I'd love hear from you all is, one, do you have any ideas you want to add to this that might not be captured, or maybe they are captured and you want to +1 them? And two, from the policy perspective, our facilitators have been spending some time thinking about, well, all of these options aren't sort of like equally possible under current state and federal law. So from a policy perspective, might it make sense to think about, okay, what is the system that might be really fully aligned to our moonshot, but would require advocacy and change at the federal law level? What might be a system that sort of gets us closer to that moonshot and really might only require state law change or state regulatory change? And then what might be a system what might be an indicator that we can sort of do now that would take us one step closer towards that moonshot, but wouldn't require any federal or state policy change? So it'd be really interesting to hear from your perspective if that kind of framework might be a useful way that our committees might collaborate in sort of moving these ideas forward. And I'll stop there. I've been speaking for long enough. Jennifer and Andre can fill in anything I might have missed that would be important to include. And certainly feel free to ask questions or comments.
Thanks, Susan. Any questions from our members? I know I believe we had at least one member. I'm thinking of you, Jim, who participated in the System of Systems cross-council working group. Did we have any other members here that jumped into that working group at the last convening? Don't think so. I think we did a really good job as a committee of spreading ourselves across all the working groups. But I think it's important that we understand what the conversation is that's emerging in the Accelerating Innovation Committee so that we are ready and informed when it comes time to develop the policy solution. So want to make sure, I know our friends from the AI committee have about 15 more minutes to stand here and answer questions. So feel free to come off mute and pick their brains a little bit about some of the conversations they're having if they're trying to design a new accountability proposal.
Roland, I've seen your comment in the chat. Do you want me to reshare my screen? Is that the request?
Yeah, I think it is actually the same board, but it's like board number 7. So if people are clicking on that link, you might end up on the first board, and there's a counter on the top. So you can, if you just go through this is the one that Susan shared was the last page. So I can also, if it's easier, I can move it over there on that one and then re-share, the link. That's probably what you were running into. Oh, maybe not, actually. You know what? This wasn't it. Okay. You know what? I'm sorry. I did share the original link. I didn't share Susan, that makes me think we did do this on a copy of the original version. So I need to dig that up.
I just linked the version I was sharing. And Edna, did you have a
Perfect.
Thanks. I do have a question. Thanks, Susan. Looks like a lot of great work and thought went into this. What I'm thinking about is the L3s that are working on their accountability processes and reporting out and working with various groups like I think KnowledgeWorks is one of them, but also Envision, and the names aren't coming to me at the moment, but have you looked at how what you are recommending aligns with the kinds of things that the districts who are starting to put out their information, how those align together, and will it create more work for those districts, or is it well aligned?
Yeah, that's such an important consideration, Edna. And the answer is no. We haven't done any type of refining or evaluation or even reflection as a committee on the options that have been generated. We tried really hard to stay in an idea generation space on Monday, which is really hard to do when you're talking about accountability indicators, because it's so tempting to just be like, oh, well, how is this going to work? And who's going to create the rubric? And how are we going to score? And how are we going to make sure it's the same? And how are you right? Who's getting paid to do this? For all of those considerations are so important, and we're just not there yet. We're still generating the ideas. And in February, we're looking forward to coming back and really parsing through them, thinking about how they relate to our design principles, how they relate to what's happening on the ground. And really, over the next year, it's going to be strategically reaching out to not only the other committees in the council, but also the commissioners' advisory groups and the L3s and other important stakeholders to make sure that whatever the ultimate proposed solution is one that aligns well and supports the local innovations that are already happening, and it isn't sort of creating barriers to more vibrant learning.
And it's possible that some of them have come up with other ideas that you'd want to integrate into this as well. So I don't know what the right point is. I'm glad to hear you will talk with them, but it might be good to pull a couple of those districts that are kind of out in the front to sort of do a scan of what you're doing and share what they're doing and see how it fitting together.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you, Edna.
Yep, sure.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Edna. And also, we're looking to you as well. And that's one of the pieces of feedback that we wanted from you today. Is this resonating with yourself? Is the system of systems or a menu of options that gets toward and fulfills the system of systems? Is that resonating as something that you would like for the Accelerating Innovation committee to continue to explore and work on? Because as you just mentioned, there's going to be a good deal of work toward refining all of those pieces. So if this resonates, then that's something that we want to do and continue with.
Jennifer, I'll jump in. So it does resonate with me a lot, and I'm really excited about thinking about how we can design this so that we can have a system that is useful and meaningful to our students and moves us toward more innovations, personalization, and choice options for our students. And I kind of define that as that most student choice is practiced within the school program, right? They're choosing what path they want to take. And right now, though, we run up against policy barriers that stifle innovations, personalization, and choice options, even within and among schools. And so one of the things, though, I've been thinking about, and my schedule hadn't allowed me to look through all of these documents yet, from looking at Kentucky existing systems and some examples, and then from other states. But I was really excited to look at this. But I also know that we had talked about maybe doing some kind of an asset audit of what's our policy landscape look like now, and what policies are really working that align to our moonshot vision and our idea of creating systems that generate more innovations in educational programming, more personalization, and choice options for kids. And so do we have a good, have we been able to kind of look at an asset audit? Because we also have policies that stifle that in our schools. And, we had that one interesting conversation one time. I can't remember which committee, if it was just this committee alone or another group I was on, but we had some of those L3 superintendents, a couple of them, and maybe another staff person presented about, some of the barriers to the work they're trying to do. And I thought that was very informative. And it transcended it wasn't just the accountability policy landscape, but, they talked about all kinds of things from calendars to time and graduation requirements and all those kinds of things. But so I'll pause there. Do we have that asset audit and have a good sense of what policies are working, what policies might need revision or repeal or otherwise to help us in the state landscape? And then I also think, thinking about those local board policies and supporting this work even at that level too is just something that is on my mind as well. But I think starting with the state makes the most sense to me, but I'll pause there and see what your response is.
Well, Jim, if I can jump in here on the policy pieces, just to provide a little bit more context there, and then would love to have our friends on AI jump in as well and respond. We did, when we first kicked off this committee, we set a 6-month goal around creating sort of conducting an audit of the state's accountability and assessment systems, in light of the Portrait of a Learner, which was the focus at that particular point in time, and KnowledgeWorks, one of the things we did as a supporting resource for that was to engage in an opportunity analysis for the state of Kentucky. And so we have that, and this is a great reminder to circulate that back around because we have new members. That was what we used to, at then the April meeting in person, to start sorting and prioritizing policy areas that this committee wanted to work on. That enabled us to identify some short-term, quick pieces, and then a bunch of longer term ones that dealt with, hey, surprise, we need to change the accountability system, right? What we're trying to do now is sequence that with the work of the other committees, particularly right now, the Accelerating Innovation Committee, because they're charged with doing sort of that initial committee level work to create, you know, a potential design idea, proposal for what a new accountability improvement might look like, and then bring that to the full council for deliberation. And so we want to make sure that our committee is prepared and ready to do the policy work when that time comes. So to your point, when that moment happens, we will be pouring through the statutes, you know, the board code, everything to try to figure out where the barriers are, what are the things that we might need to change. The other piece I wanted to mention, this will be out very soon, but we have also developed a innovation playbook resource for the state of Kentucky to help districts, so the audience is districts for this particular piece, figure out how to use existing policy flexibilities to design more innovative learning experiences. And it features the stories of all of those amazing districts who are doing this work in Kentucky already, so that they can be an inspiration to other districts across the state. And so that resource will be helpful, I think, for individuals in the field who are looking for ideas and wanting to learn from their peers. So we've got some pieces in the hopper, but I know you are hungry, as are, I think, are all of us, to like start putting pen to paper on how to amend, you know, Kentucky's policies. And we can't quite do that until we have the council ready with some kind of a prototype to move forward.
And that makes sense. And now I will say that at our last convening, it made me really excited to think about, you know, trying to create that connection to the local community, so that you know, we're thinking about our schools and what do our invested stakeholders, students, parents, employers, you know, community folks that care deeply about their local schools, what do they expect as the benefit of those local schools for students, and connecting that to the work that we're doing. And so thinking about, you know, having a piece of real estate or landscape on the accountability and the school report card space that allows for that partnership, you know, with the state, and thinking about having a very stable state component of accountability, but then a local piece, a local community-based piece that is more agile and nimble and responsive, you know, to maybe changing local contextual needs. And so that, to me, is really exciting to think about a menu of options and what that could look like, and building that framework so that you know, we could build the capacity for districts to do that, and build the connection with their local community stakeholders, so that they have more buy-in and ownership, and don't feel like everything's coming from, you know, the feds or from Frankfurt driving what has to be done in schools, but that they're empowered to also you know, have a chance to drive things that they value and care about. So I love the work, and I hope we can continue down that path.
Yeah, and maybe I want to add quickly here. This is Andre from the Acceleration Innovation Committee. Also, this idea that you are all through this conversation that we are having right now, really having visibility in sort of one part of the bridge building process. So in terms of like making the connections to what's going on in local districts closer and tighter while ideas are being developed, we are doing similar connections, making similar connections with the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee as well, because they are closest to the innovative programs. And the thinking overall around the innovations in assessment and accountability also aren't just limited, I would say, to the indicator and the menu of options sort of as a technocratic mechanism. We are talking about other aspects like the reporting of information from local innovations more broadly through dashboards, for example. We are thinking through, resource banks and data banks in terms of like what the supporting tools would look like. And then there's, of course, always the slightly more formal components as well that require more immediate policy oversight. So just want to contextualize that a little bit there.
Great. Well, I know our accelerating innovation friends, some had a hard stop at 4:15. So I know, Susan, you were one. So I want to be really respectful of that. And thank you for joining. If others are able to stay, please feel free. We'd love to have you involved in this conversation. But definitely want to thank Susan for joining.
Thank you to this entire committee, and this is not the last time, hopefully, that you'll be hearing from us, and hopefully you'll be joining our meetings as well to make sure that we're all moving on the same train. So thank you very much. Appreciate this.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, so for some of us, I know the first time I sat in on an Accelerating Innovation Committee meeting, it was a little bit like drinking from a fire hose because we haven't been in those conversations. So I'm imagining for some of you, it's like, whoa, what are they talking about? We actually wanted them to come and present so that we can better understand the topics they're considering. And now we actually want to take a step back and begin to think about what this committee and anyone working on policy across the Cool Council will need to be thinking about as we ready ourselves to develop the policy proposed amendments that would align to this idea that'll emerge. So just wanted to pivot us a little bit now. John and I are going to take the next 30 or 40 minutes or so of this meeting to do a little bit of grounding, but it's going to be very much time for discussion and questions. We're going to spend some time better understanding this concept of a menu of options. Like, what does that even really mean? How are we seeing other states use menus of options? That will help us, I think, begin to understand the concept and hopefully make us better equipped to be able to then start to explore some of the policy considerations that we will likely all be involved in when that time comes. So I'm going to share my screen again first and just reground us in a couple of things, which we may be a little bit repetitive from some of the discussion we just had, but that's always good. Wanted to first remind folks of the draft Cool Council moonshot that a group of stakeholders were working on when we were together in November. This is still in draft form, but is very close to being finalized. So know that pretty soon we will have that circulated in final language. But the moonshot that was set was to build a prosperous Kentucky. We will launch an accountability system that is meaningful and useful to all of our learners. The key words in this that I heard when many of the Cool Council members were speaking to it is the meaningful and useful. So I think as you are beginning to hear some of the conversations that the Accelerating Innovation Committee members were sharing, is this idea of how do we make sure that we are collecting meaningful information information that districts are collecting now that are meaningful, that are telling them about the quality of learning, as well as useful, right? That this is useful information that the system can use to drive decisions to improve learning for our students. So that's really the charge. So given that, what is our policy charge as we begin to think about this piece? So once the Cool Council adopts a proposal to improve Kentucky's accountability system, again, this will just be a proposal, right? Remember when we talked about the charter work in our November meeting, anything the Cool Council has developed, right, is going to then need to go through KDE and then will be presented to the state board, but it's a proposal. But when that proposal is adopted, the very next question would be, well, then how would the policy system need to change in order to adopt that new accountability proposal? And that's a question that for those who are involved in the policy work will need to be ready to weigh in on. So given that, we're probably going to spend a lot of time involved in some exploratory conversations. There's a lot that we need to learn to be ready to weigh in those conversations. So some initial learning questions, and I say initial because I suspect this list will get long as we go through this process, but some initial learning questions might be, first, what actually is a menu of options? We're going to dig into that question today. So John has done some great research, as he always does, to pull some examples for us to look at. And there was a pre-read that got sent around today. And so when you do have time, that will be a written version of some of the examples that we'll talk about today from not only Kentucky, but other states. The second question, what does the federal government require for state accountability systems? So there's going to be a lot of great ideas that people are going to develop and want to explore. At the end of the day, whatever is developed, should the Kentucky Department of Education, the Kentucky State Board of Education decide that that's something that they feel really good about and that's a direction they want to move forward on, that proposal would need to go to the federal government for approval. And that's a different set of requirements that we're going to need to think about. So the best thing we can do as Cool Council members is to start thinking about those things, right? So we need to understand, well, what does the federal government even require of state accountability systems? So we're going to make sure that we are up to speed on those requirements and also to understand why those requirements exist. What was the debate that went into the decision to put those requirements in place? And then lastly, once we have a good sense of what the federal requirements are, that's where we get into the real good dialogue, probably that Jim is like really craving getting into. So what adjustments or improvements might actually be needed to that proposal to best position Kentucky to secure federal approval? We're going to need to build confidence, right, in federal leaders that what Kentucky has developed is not only a compelling idea, but an idea that's going to be really good for students. And we need to figure out how we're going to help make that case. So those are the learning questions that we propose. We're going to try to tackle some of these over the course of the next few meetings. But what we want to lean on you heavily on in this process is help us populate this list. Like, these are our shared learning questions. So please be flagging, I need to learn more about this. Like, what about this? Like, let's add to the list so that we are making our meetings as meaningful as possible. I'm going to pass to my colleague, John, who's going to walk us through a couple examples of a menu of options. Again, this isn't about the details of that specific policy or what indicators they chose, but it's helping us understand what is a menu. And so he's going to walk us through those and then has some conversation starter questions that we can use to really help us more deeply understand this concept. So John, I'll pass to you.
Thanks, Lillian. And just to reiterate one more time what Lillian said, I think prefacing before jumping into this, what we're really hoping to achieve is not advocate for any one specific model or suggest that one model might be the right one for Kentucky, but more to give people an idea of what different examples of menus look like for states that are using something similar to what the AI committee might be using in a policy context across the country. So these were collected from primarily what's known in written form. So one other caveat is that we may or may not have more in-depth knowledge or context around these examples in terms of how they're actually playing out in practice. So for that reason, again, really trying to use these more as a thought experiment and for fodder for future discussion. That said, if folks are interested in any of these specific examples, we are more than happy to do some digging around our networks and trying to learn a bit more if there's a specific one that folks start getting really interested in. So before jumping into what some other states are doing, we just want to do a quick kind of overview of the current, as Lillian alluded to, closest thing that Kentucky has right now to more of a menu of options, and that would be the post-secondary readiness indicator. So I know Jennifer has a much more in-depth overview of the post-secondary readiness indicator that she shared during the AI meeting this last Monday. So I'm not going to do it justice here, but in summary, if it's not something you're as familiar with, it's actually very similar to a number of other states within their federal accountability system that use a college and career readiness indicator. Essentially, what these typically have are a number of different options that a student can use to satisfy or meet this definition of being college and career ready. So in the case of Kentucky, there's a number of things, including college placement exams, different scores or achieving different levels on AP, IB, or CIA exams, college credit from different sources, workforce-aligned education opportunities, or earning some type of industry-recognized credentials. Again, super high-level overview. There's a whole lot more nuance to it. But that's kind of the idea of, as students have that choice, then districts have choice into what kinds of opportunity to develop so that students can then exercise that menu of how they're going to show that level of readiness. The other thing that we did want to add is that in addition to that, there's been some conversation in the past about how might districts include information, even if it's not for actual accountability purposes, more for informational purposes, on the state report card. One thing that districts can currently do is that on each school page, there is a narrative element where superintendents can add information to the profile page, which could include information about things like the local accountability systems, portrait of a learner, portrait of a graduate, as those things are developed. So that's kind of what we have now in terms of that menu of opportunities and then opportunities to convey information. So moving on to some other examples of what some states are currently doing. And one thing, Lillian, apologies, it was either you or Susan that alluded to this, but they're within federal accountability requirements, certain conditions that have to be met around some of these indicators that make them a bit more constrained in how creative they can be. So you're going to notice that a number of these, and I'll try to flag, are very similar in some ways to what Kentucky's doing, but all have their kind of own unique flavor. There are a couple that are not federally focused that do get a bit more creative, I think, in some ways too. So first one being Colorado. They have an option called a menu of options for graduation. And this is not actually, I believe, a part of the state's federal accountability system, but rather a state option. So in addition to graduation rate, students have to show that they are ready for success after high school upon graduating. So students, and then again by extension districts, have that menu of options where they can prove readiness. And this gives districts a number of ways, very similar in a lot of respects to the types of things, scores in advanced placement exams, participation in workforce readiness pieces that allow students to show that they are ready for what comes next. One interesting note is that unlike Kentucky's, they include a couple of things that are present in some of the local accountability systems, such as a capstone opportunity, which a number of districts, I believe, are participating in, as well as the opportunity to collaboratively develop a standards-based performance assessment. So again, not fully, I believe, Lillian, this is correct, part of the federal accountability system, but is more a state accountability piece, right?
Yes, that's correct. So you have a little bit more leeway when you're working in a state system. And so Colorado was able to move forward with this because it was in a graduation requirement. But again, I think some of the things that Kentucky is trying to explore is, can Kentucky be cutting edge and push the envelope a little bit more and try to get the federal government to see how some of these types of indicators may be built into federal systems.
Yeah. So another interesting one similar to Colorado is North Dakota. They have what's called their Choice Ready framework. And this is actually a part of their federal accountability system. So it utilizes a slightly different approach where students have to meet a number of minimum requirements to graduate choice ready, but there is some flexibility in how to do it. For example, in their kind of baseline, all students have to meet certain diploma and course requirements. There's a number of other options that students can use. There's 8 different options. I believe students have to meet 4 of them. One of these can include a demonstration of 21st century skills. So that is, again, one example where there's a bit more creativity. It's included along with those big pieces, but that is included in the federal accountability piece. There's also 3 other components, which are called their choice ready components. Students have to do 2 of the 3 of those, and there's a significant amount of choice that exists within those pathways as well. And this makes up about currently 21% of their high school ratings. Moving on from North Dakota and Colorado, there is another very brief option that is similar. Pennsylvania does offer some local choice within their college and career readiness indicator. Students have to engage in career exploration. And again, just a little menu of options thing. These examples, students have to, or there is a local option to develop that career exploration piece. So it's not just something that's dictated by the states. States can actually develop their own example of what they want, or districts can develop their own example of what they want to do with that. So another example of how a state is thinking about this is, and I'm a bit more familiar with this, Louisiana's strength of a diploma indicator. So their approach, rather than have a menu of options necessarily saying you have to meet a certain number of these to be called college and career ready, they take more of an incentive-based approach on top of existing requirements. So the way that this works out, and if you access that document, I included a couple of links in there. Thank you for sharing that in the chat, Tammy, that you can see kind of how this plays out. So Louisiana essentially allows for bonus points for achieving certain metrics on top of its traditional diploma option. So basically, if you earn a diploma as a student, the district gets 100% for that. However, there are partial bonus points that you can get, for example, earning a diploma plus passing college, or having a passing grade on an AP exam or dual enrollment, or earning a basic industry value credential. You can get more points for having a passing AP score. And then if you get an associate's degree, you get 60 extra bonus points. So again, there, instead of saying just you have a menu of options, you have to pick some of these to demonstrate that you are college and career ready. They actually say this actually can get you a better score overall if your students go above and beyond this basic metric. A couple other interesting ones, and I should caveat both of these, Indiana and North Carolina, and on some level, they're still developing their new local menu of options. So as a part of Indiana's accountability redesign, they're proposing schools might potentially be held accountable for things such as if students are enrolled in a post-secondary pathway, as well as whether they're earning a living wage if employed. So again, some interesting implications in there for how schools can include things then like college and career readiness, counseling, help students find that next pathway. There's also a requirement in the system that students have to, similar to North Dakota, satisfy 3 requirements for graduation, one of them which is employability skills. And then here again, similar to Pennsylvania, districts can create their own locally created pathway that can be determined by local competencies or assessments. And I was able to find evidence of at least 3 school districts that have done this to date. North Carolina is another interesting one in that they are currently going through a big state superintendent-led initiative called, I believe, Operation Polaris, and they are redesigning their accountability process in part around their new Portrait of a Learner. There's a number of different metrics they're considering implementing, but one of these that's been present throughout, included in some recommendations from a task force that was working on this, are some measures that are considering the percentage of students that are demonstrating the 7 durable skills that are defined in the North Carolina Portrait of a Learner. So again, these are the Indiana and North Carolina ones are more in development, but they are, I think, informative of some of the ways states are thinking about this. So we wanted to make sure to include them here again as kind of food for thought for the group. Just 2 more to note here. So Utah is another state that has a different menu of options than the either incentives provided by Louisiana or more of the choice-ready pathway pieces provided by some of the states like Colorado and North Dakota. They're more similar to this current structure that we flagged for Kentucky, where superintendents can add a narrative around what certain districts and schools are doing to the report card. They have a specific area. If you actually go to the report card where it notes that they can add 2 self-reported indicators to the school report card page. So if you were to say maybe extrapolate that to something like Kentucky, if you had a district that had their own local accountability measure around something like a portrait of a learner, within the context of that, that could be something that could be considered to be added to a page like that. So it is not in there again for actual accountability scoring purposes, but does provide that level of visibility and information for something like that. The last example that we just wanted to highlight is a locally created accountability system for Texas. So this is what Susan actually, again, I think interesting note, our friend Susan who left us calls an augmented model, where it goes beyond what the state or the federal accountability system requires under the federal policy frameworks and allows for the creation of something local. So the legislation from 2017 created criteria that plans are created by local districts in collaboration with the Texas Education Agency, but they focus on local level metrics that are not specifically found in the state accountability system. So caveat, Texas does use an A through F grading model for each campus. So the local accountability system does have to operate from an A through F model. But it does appear that there are a number of districts that did participate in this pilot and created these local accountability systems after the legislation was passed. And again, this is not a model that we're as familiar with directly, but we could certainly find out more if folks are interested. The technical guide for the state does indicate that campuses that get an A, B, or C for a local model can, in some level, combine the state and local accountability ratings together to count for a certain percentage to make a combined rating. This does not impact the district accountability, but does impact the school level accountability. So again, we're not as familiar with that, but I did think that was an interesting one to note, just how another state is thinking about local created accountability and how it might feed into a state level accountability system. So those are some of the examples. Again, we're just trying to give out for food for thought for folks to think through. I think as the next piece, what we wanted to do is just have some opportunity for folks to share out, to ask questions. So, I would say respond to any of these 4 questions that we have here up on the screen, but we'd love to hear what are some thoughts and reflections that you might be having after hearing these examples. Are there any ideas from other states that especially stand out to you? What questions do you have? And what ideas does this spark for you about possibilities for Kentucky's own accountability system? So we'll open the floor.
And while folks are thinking about those questions, I think one of the reflections that I wanted to share is one of the things that I find so helpful at looking at a wide range of examples from other states is it really sparks ideas about what's possible, all of the different decision points at the end of the day, right? That Kentucky would have to consider if it decided to change its system. This is the fun part about policy work. So, if you think about some of the examples he shared, are we looking at strategies that provide bonus points? Are we looking at voluntary self-reported indicators? Are we looking at, a system that, is primarily focusing on graduation? Are we looking at trying to amend federal accountability? Are we blending federal and state systems, right? There's so many different layers, I think, to how you could drive the types of change that you want. And it's helpful to look at examples that are so very different. And I, feel confident that each of these states went through really robust conversations around all of the different ways you could design this before they landed on whatever model they decided to use.
Yeah, Lillian and John, I want to jump in here on a few things that my mind started thinking about. But one is, the idea of kind of, inputs and outputs, or leading indicators, lagging indicators. And so there were some things in there that made me think about things that we know are good for kids, good experiences. Maybe they're hard to measure from an output or a lagging indicator standpoint, but we can still find value in those things as part of a system because we know they're good for students to have those experiences. The other thing I thought about was, choice, agency, and personalization are so important, I think, to our vision for a personalized, deep learning experience in our schools. And I think we got to watch out for bonus points and how those are used, because too often in high stakes accountability, they push schools, to push students maybe more than the students, finding their own way and having that true personalized experience. And so it made me think about being careful there. But the Colorado, for example, that there were a lot of different options, and students could choose how they demonstrate that post-secondary readiness or whatever. As an example, that can be a good way. But then in systems where you get bonus points for kids doing these things, in the past in Kentucky, we saw where those kinds of systems got gained more, and not in the best interest always of the kids. So anyway, I'll shut up and listen. But I loved being able to look at these, and I want to dive deeper in some of these state models that you all shared. But thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Those are really awesome reflections. And one of the reasons we wanted to share the document is so that you would have it in your arsenal, right? For any of you when you do have time to go and read and think about and reflect on these examples. If there's ever, if there's one in particular that's really interesting and you want to dig deeper at some point, let us know. We can always go deeper around any of these states, in any of our meetings, if that might be helpful. I also wanted to call out Jessica, love your reflection on we think is it Pennsylvania, John, that had emphasis at elementary, middle, and high school. So really affirming this notion of looking at some sort of demonstration, right, of quality of readiness of learning at each sort of key transition point across the K-12 system. And then Bentley, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to this idea, but I think it's a really interesting idea. Like, how do we bring learning defenses in as an indicator? I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to that, but I think that's a great idea.
So, basically, I was kind of thinking with that, it could, how do I go with this? Almost like a PhD type dissertation style, where you would have to like do a research project and then you'd have to defend it, but it wouldn't be it obviously wouldn't be getting a PhD. It would be a high school indicator, but almost something similar to that. So I was kind of going on track of like how some capstone projects would require that and stuff. But that could also be just a general like success indicator as well.
Yeah, that's great. Andre, I don't want to put you on the spot, but did that come up as a potential indicator in the AI committee? Was there a member interest around this notion of, a defensive learning?
Yeah, so that definitely came up. If you were to go back to the Jamboard, you can see that a few people called it exhibitions and defenses of learning and other kinds of performance events. But those two, that language was used particularly. And the VLE committee also talked about, the relevance of those along with performance tasks and portfolios as sort of like the key events and assessment and learning mechanisms that could be lifted up and integrated. I will say that there were a few members who said, well, we have some questions about whether, for example, all learner can be sort of properly prepared for these defenses and whether integrating them into more formal systems might potentially corrupt their intentions, right? And so there's that entire kind of space to think through. And I think maybe one bridging opportunity might be, for example, we've recently written a little blog on like how you can look at defenses and exhibition of learning and think through the methodological design decisions that people are making when they're setting these up. You know, how the panels are composed, how feedback is given, how exemplars are being selected, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think as part of this work, if people wanted to lift that up, a defense of learning into a menu, that's the kind of work that should be done to sort of ask the questions about like, so how do we learn to even talk about how different people are going about this, especially when they're either done locally from the ground up or maybe are sort of also supported by funding from organizations like PBL Works or the Deeper Learning Initiative or whatever organization a district decides to work with. So, you know.
Thank you. So it's good to hear that it's bubbling up as an area of interest, even if there's a lot of technical considerations to think about.
Yeah, and maybe one quick thing I'm going to say. So if you were to look at the Jamboard stickies, what you'd also find is that people were trying to say, okay, so if we wanted to not create additional burden for people, right, or minimize it, there's always going to be some burden, but minimize the additional burden. Let's think about what are the things that are naturally being done anyway. So like, I think under, models where portraits of a graduate are so where curricular models and future professional development is changed or oriented toward the development of these competencies in the portrait of a graduate, then I think you do see that defenses of learning and exhibitions of learning are a natural part of that work. So people were like, well, we do this anyway. Could we lift that up in some way? And similarly, some people called out things like, oh, we're already doing walkthroughs the district leaders are doing to sort of look at how teachers are providing the opportunities for deeper learning that eventually are required for the defense of learning. So is there something that we could sort of like pull out of that? And there was also conversation, and I'll be quiet about this, but this notion about what are sort of the programs that are being offered at the high school level, right? So if people have dual credit courses, the CTE courses, you could look at the curricula of these courses and the experiences and also kind of like focus a little bit more specifically on deeper learning kind of components of those. And without doing anything extra, you could sort of extract information, which is this data review comment. I'll stop there. But yes, we're trying to think about that in our committee as much as possible. It's just about how do we organize this and present that across the committee so that people can understand what needs to be thought about and what it means to support this kind of idea in particular ways.
And really quick, Andre and Bentley, I didn't include this in the table because it is not technically legally a part of New Mexico's graduation or accountability requirements, but I'll drop this link in the chat. Bentley, your comment made me start thinking about this. There is a community of practice that is currently taking place and has been, I believe, for 4 or 5 years now in New Mexico. Essentially, it's replacing some state assessment requirements with a capstone project. And they'd actually worked last session to try and get that included as a part of graduation requirements. It was not successful. But, again, I think it is interesting, Andre, to note, and you might actually, maybe this is something we explore in the future, is are there examples of maybe innovative assessment that are not currently being used in ways like what Colorado is doing or what New Mexico is doing, but could potentially be used in that way? That could be another interesting area for this group to explore.
Yeah, I love that. It's good.
That's great. I'm seeing a comment here from Tammy. If we're looking at different state examples, might it be interesting to also look at how those different menus are helping produce outcomes? Like, are we seeing things like graduation rates improving? Are we seeing college entry or, college readiness improving? So that could be a really interesting learning question. I'm seeing Karen and Jessica both thumbs upping that. So some affirmation and Edna too. Great. Any other questions or reactions or any other learning questions you want to throw in the mix for us to keep digging into a committee.
I do also want to say, so like there are some programs, so like supervised ag experiences and like through FFA/CTE and stuff like that, where those are effectively almost already a sort of capstone project or learning defense of their own. So would there be a possibility of those somehow being like almost like dual credit or dual enrollment, where they could be like dually recognized as you're completing an SAE project, but then you're also completing a capstone or a learning defense at the same time?
Yeah, it almost makes me think about like the states that do like diploma seals, or like a way to show that you've accomplished this and this. Like that could be an interesting, that's a really interesting idea to throw in the mix as well.
Bailey, can you say the idea one more time? I was looking at the chat and I just missed it. I want to make sure I capture it correctly.
So like for SAEs, which are supervised agricultural experiences through like ag and FFA/CTE, you basically, it's effectively a capstone project in and of its own, where you have to have a certain amount of hours doing the project. You have to have a certain amount of income based on doing it and stuff like that. It's a true real world experience. Could those also be like dually recognized as completing the SAE, but then also completing a capstone or learning defense project?
It's great. Edna had a question, John. This is directed right to you because I know you wanted a good disclaimer around this. Are there other states we should be looking at? Do you think these are the standouts?
That is a great question, Edna. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, well, I'll say two things. For the purposes of this conversation, when I spent some time researching this over the past few days, I was looking more for a diversity of examples. So I would not treat this necessarily as an exhaustive search, just given the amount of time that I had to put into it. So the other thing that I will say is, and this is my personal bias, but I'm always hesitant to recommend necessarily saying this is a state you should look at, or this is a thing you should do to any state, because one state is never like another state. For example, the way that, in my mind, Utah structures their contribution of additional data points that aren't captured in the state accountability system might make perfect sense, but there might be also a perfectly rational reason why that would not be the right fit for Kentucky. So I always like to caveat examples like this with saying the goal here is more to provide the committee members like you with an idea of how are some other states approaching it, but not having a specific value judgment of saying, this is the state to look at, or this is the best state. I think it's more about what is right for Kentucky, what's the context, what's the structure that you all want to have in place. And from there, I think we could say, well, here are some examples of how you might do that. In this particular case, here are some examples of a menu of options that you might look at. What sticks out from you then? How might we take pieces of this and do something similar for Kentucky, if that is what the committee decides to do? Was that hedging enough?
That was fine, John. I just was thinking more about, should I go looking more deeply, or have you already done all the footwork? And it sounds like you've done a lot of the good footwork. So unless I bump into something, I probably won't explore it.
Have you all looked at states that may have been successful with waivers from the feds to do things differently that might be informative?
So that's going to be my strong suit, is the federal space. There aren't a lot of waivers from the feds in the accountability space. There was a waiver a little while back for a group of districts in California called the core districts that were looking at trying to create a kind of a local accountability system and had some flexibility to do that separate from the state of California. So that's certainly an example that we could kind of bring in, but there hasn't been a lot of openness to date for the federal government to provide accountability waivers. I will say that the U.S. Department of Education has signaled some increased interest around assessment innovation and wanting to really encourage states to lead in that area. So that's an encouraging sign. As we all know, assessment and accountability go hand in hand. So I think there's some hope that we might also see some appetite down the road around accountability. And certainly, encourage states to be exploring that and having those conversations with the department. But that's a great flag, Jim. And certainly as we're looking at the federal space, there is some nuance, for example, around how the department has provided guidelines around the menu of options examples that states have used for their post-secondary readiness indicator and their accountability systems. So we can dig much more deeply into that as we begin to think about what the federal government might allow and where they might have some concerns.
Yeah, I just texted a friend of mine because we had talked about this, and he reminded me is Montana got something. Are you familiar with that?
So, yes, absolutely. That was on the assessment side. They were able to secure a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education to essentially move forward with kind of full field testing of a new accountability, new assessment system without having to run their old assessment system simultaneously. And so that was, kind of a pretty interesting signal from the department around assessment that they're open to thinking differently. And then the department just put out some new guidance around the Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority program, trying to clarify and make it a little bit of an easier pathway for states. And so that's another encouraging sign, again, on the assessment side, but because there's such a tight alignment to accountability that we're hopeful that there's a signal there as well. With that, we're going to have to unfortunately pivot to the next item on our agenda, but let's keep this conversation going.
Lillian, I'm sorry, can I ask just one quick follow-up question from the chat? Roland,
yeah.
I just want to clarify, you were asking specifically about, and feel free to answer this in the chat, states that have a POG but maybe aren't doing anything but are looking. So you're interested in states that are doing both, either not doing something or are interested in doing something, right?
Yeah, I just noticed that in your report, Michigan, South Carolina weren't included. Is it they weren't included because they're not doing anything different, or that they're kind of like us, they're in the process of figuring it out? I was just trying to collaborate those things or make those things fit together for me. I'm sorry. I may not have said it very well.
No, great question. I just want to make sure I understood the question correctly.
Great. And thanks. Sorry, Roland, I hadn't seen that in the chat. And John, thanks for calling that out. So we'll keep this conversation going. We're going to keep digging in. We've got a lot of time in our upcoming committee meetings to think about this issue. The Cool Council is going to need to, we have a lot of learning to do together as we begin to explore what some of these options might look like and what some of the pros and cons are going to be for each. We needed to pivot into working group updates, and I believe John and Tammy are next up on the agenda there. So I'll let you guys flip a coin to decide who wants to go first.
I'm typing in the chat an answer to Roland. So Tammy, can you go first while I type?
Okay, sure, no problem. And Lillian, you want to just flick since you're already sharing, do the screen thing. Okay, so my update, and you all received some pre-reading, and we can quickly put the document in chat also. Hang on a minute. Oh, someone will do that after in a second. But basically, and this was on the slide deck update that was also provided to y'all in the beginning of December, when we had to unfortunately postpone or cancel our monthly meeting. As a result, and those who attended the Cool Council meeting in November might remember this, we broke off into separate work groups on the second day. And one of those work groups was called Engaging with Communities. We had a small but mighty crew in that particular work group. Edna, I know was one of them, and I'm not looking at the full screen to see who else is here right now. But anyway, the output from that work group and the recommendations that came forward to the full Cool Council was for the BNF. It was sort of punt the ball, if you will, that the BNF perhaps consider taking on the thinking process that started within that work group, and perhaps consider the formation of an ongoing work group for a period of time to do some very specific things. And since we have experience with our policy work group in doing such a thing, we all thought, let's put this forward to the BNF and see what they think at large, because not all of our committee members were a part of that separate little work group in November. Similar to the policy work group, the formation proposal, if you will, would be to have some representation from the BNF. This isn't a situation where you're all serving on this work group. So either don't panic or don't get excited that you would, because the idea that worked really well for the policy work group was to actually go outside of the BNF and secure some experts in the various fields, some diversity of representation, especially some KDE representation outside and the education related community. A chat just came up on my screen, and to do some work separate from the full BNF, and then to bring those recommendations to the BNF for consideration and whether they want to push the ideas or that work product forward to the full Cool Council for approval or formation, much like the chartering system is developing now. So I threw together this draft proposal with a message to y'all to describe that, outline what I thought might be the kind of buckets of categories of people that we might want to have, not individual people, obviously, but in terms of categories of representation of experience in relevant areas. And I wouldn't envision this work group being enormous. There's sort of a right size for a work group to actually get something done, but we would have folks representing perhaps the KD communications and strategy area. And I saw Karen was attending here, and we've had some separate conversations that align with some of this proposal that perhaps the Cool Council could benefit from some more active communications work and storytelling about the work that's going on in the Cool Council, and the work that is also aligned and kind of circling the work of the Cool Council, such as related to the L3s and Portrait of a Graduate initiatives and things like that. And so really for our conversation today, what we all want to know, and sort of your facilitator group, if you will, is what your thoughts, comments, questions might be about the proposal or the idea conceptually of forming and engaging with the community's work group. Secondly, what you think about the recommendations that came out of the Cool Council for the type of work that this group might do, and that's in your proposal document. And my third question, and I should have put this on a slide, but I didn't, sorry. The third question is any suggestions for who or organizationally might be good to have seats on this work group, so that then we could go to a, if you will, recruiting process or a request process to see if we could get people in the chairs to move this work group forward. Yeah, let me grab that. Hang on just a second. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Thanks, Roland. So I'm very good at pregnant, long teacher waiting silences. Thoughts, comments, questions, reactions to the proposal, other ideas for who should be represented on this group, or if you hate the idea entirely, we'll punt this right back to the Cool Council, or to some other body to kind of carry some of this work forward.
Tammy, I'm sorry, but you just made a huge friend with the pregnant pause acknowledgement. If you're going to ask a good question, give people a chance to think, I greatly appreciate that. I'm not as fast as some other people, so I need more time. So thank you.
Tammy, I'll just say that in some of our earlier meetings, we had some of our members who that's what their passion was. So I would love to hear from some of them that may be on here, because that we kind of had that little experience where, you know, some of us were kind of more passionate about the policy environment, how do we shape that for this work, and then some were really more passionate about how do we connect communities to this work, and both are important.
Thanks, Jessica, I saw your comment in the chat. Yes, Jessica was a great member of our little small and mighty work group in November. And Jim, actually just following up on your comment, I thought earlier, about an hour ago, when you were talking about the local schools and input from the local, communities into the landscape of, for example, the school report card, relative to accountability and those sorts of things. I think that's sort of, to me, like one of our, if you will, overarching objectives for something like this, as work is happening in the AI standing committee, as well as vibrant learning experience, and then our work trying to connect those dots in the policy framework. I think hearing response, reaction, feedback, input from our local communities and putting some sort of facility in place to make that happen, or at least keep that in the forefront of the agenda, might be an important role to play of actually having a work group really focused on engaging communities.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always said when I was superintendent, I would remind our community that it gets the schools it wants. But they got to be engaged with us, and but we have to have mechanisms for them to be engaged, and they have to feel like the work that they do to help us is impactful, and that's why this fits in so well. So.
Great words, Jim. I'd like to know how you did that.
What's that?
I'd love to know how you did that, how you got your community engaged in ways that they felt like they knew they were contributing to the output.
Yeah, one of the things I learned is that you had to be vulnerable with them some and tell them what you were struggling with and needed help with, and sometimes that's a little scary when you're the superintendent, but what I learned is that when you were vulnerable and shared with them, what your struggles and challenges were, and painted a picture of what can be, that they would step up and do. But you had to take that risk.
Yeah, so that's, I think, like Jessica, I was on this committee as well, and so I was trying to be quiet. But, because I definitely agree, and I think that we can't start communicating too soon. We have to help people who are not as connected to what we're doing understand how much work is being done to try to improve the educational system in Kentucky. And if we could get a good message that everybody could carry back to their communities, that's concise and clear, I think that's a great first step.
Any other initial
More than a day
reactions
in
or
May,
thoughts?
Edna.
What?
Our kids are more than a day in May.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, we trying to keep ourselves on a little bit of a time frame schedule here. Any other initial reactions, thoughts, likes, don't likes, thumbs up, thumbs down in any of this? And you can always email us separately. Hearing none. Lillian? Oh, no, sorry, John. You've
John,
got
yeah.
8 seconds on policy work group.
Well, that's great. I can take 8 seconds. So we, number one, just wanted to acknowledge there was a lot of interest for folks and potentially participating in the policy working group going forward. We're so thankful for those that gave their time and energy to helping craft some of the initial recommendations that came out of it. I think that in large part, as the Cool Council coming out of the November convening determined needed to develop that system of systems design, that was honestly where most of the remaining recommendations centered. So we collectively as a leadership group determined it was probably in the best interest of the group to not ask folks to be putting in a bunch of time and energy until that next step in the process from AI has come out. I think too, there may be other additional priorities that may pop up that may necessitate maybe some reconvening of the policy group. But for the moment, until one of those two things happen, we're certainly not disbanding the policy group, but just pushing pause on it for the time being. So we will certainly follow up with folks if and when there's a need to bring that back in a more regular fashion, but that's kind of where that is sitting for now.
Great, thanks, John. So we have had a really productive meeting, and we are getting very close to our scheduled ending time. So we do have two sort of remaining business items. One was the election of a vice chair, and unfortunately, we did have a few members that had to leave early, and so we no longer have a quorum to be able to have a formal vote. But I am happy to share that Tracy Leonard, one of our new members, volunteered to be a considered candidate for the vice chair role. If any other members are interested in running as well, we'll send out a reminder email about that opportunity, and we will postpone the election to February. We will be sure to put that early in the agenda in case people need to leave early so that we can maintain that quorum. The last item was the identification of a meeting date in February. So if you could take just a minute or two and either put in the chat or send us an email, sort of any conflicts you have those first 2 weeks of February, any dates that you want us to avoid, or date preferences, we'll coordinate calendars so that we can get our next meeting scheduled. Other than that, I know Bentley needed to hop off. He was sort of charged with closing us out. Bentley, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So, are we wanting to set the date now before we all leave?
I think we'll need to wait and just let everyone kind of give us their schedule availability, and then we'll need to coordinate calendars. So we will wait to schedule the date, but hopefully we can do that tomorrow if possible, so everyone can get that on their calendar.
Okay, so that sounds good to me. I feel like we had a really productive meeting today. I don't know about anyone else. So we talked about a lot. We had some good ideas. Does anyone have any like questions, comments, current concerns, like anything they want to get out there and share before we leave?
I'll just remind everybody the legislature's in session, and so talking to those folks and tell them your ideas is helpful. So I encourage you to engage with them.
Yes.
Also-
Legislative, sorry, go ahead.
The Pritchard Committee has a weekly legislative update on education pieces. If you're interested, I think you could contact the Pritchard Committee and get the Zoom information to participate in that.
Yes, I do think that would also be a good, sorry, I do think that would also be a good option. So, could we somehow reach out to that committee and try and see if we can somehow do something with that?
And would Brooke be the right person to maybe pass that along to everyone with her affiliation with Pritchard?
I was just typing it in the
Okay,
chat.
great.
It's Suzetta Creech.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay,
Yeah. So if you just go on their website, look up Suzetta, you can get to her. Yeah.
that's great. Thank you.
Okay, I really do need to go. So
Okay.
great meeting, everyone. Goodbye. I will
Great.
see you at our next meeting.
Thanks, Bentley.
Congrats, Bentley.
Bye.